Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give of their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guest for today. Welcome, mentors, to Mentorships in Education. This is Judith Epstein, your host. Mentorships in Education is brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I hope you will go there and see the menu of guests we've had and look over the topics to see what appeals to you. Today, we will be continuing our look into ASD from very different perspectives. We've had guests that have spoken about their experiences with students. Coach Jim Johnson has spoken to us about his miracle on the court. Dr. Keith Story has talked to us about different paths for a happy and productive life. And Rob Gorski, the autism dad, has spoken to us from his perspective as the father of 3 children who have been diagnosed with autism. I'm very excited because this is a milestone for me. This is our 20th podcast. We haven't even reached 1 year yet. So I want to welcome our guest, Janice Nathan. Janice, thank you.
Thank you.
You've won the award for the 20th guest on Mentorships in Education. Thank you so much. Before we get into our conversation, Janice, I want to talk a little bit about your background so our listeners know how qualified you are to be speaking on this topic on autism. One of the first things I noticed about your bio was that you had a CCC after your name. And I talked to you about that and did a little research, and I found out that that meant Certificate of Clinical Competence for people who are speech and language professionals. It's a very high accreditation above the normal standard, and it just tells me how qualified you are to be speaking about this topic. So again, I thank you. Janice is the owner of the Nathan Services. She's been working with children for over 20 years, children who have been diagnosed on the spectrum and other neurodevelopmental disorders. She grew up with a family that parents and who were diagnosed with ASD, which is very interesting, and she's going to talk to us about that later. Her background is very personal when it comes to this subject. She and her husband wrote a book called Building Reasoning and Problem-Solving Skills in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder, a step-by-step guide to the thinking in speech, and that this is an approach that Janice has developed, and we are going to talk a little bit about this. And you don't have to worry about writing anything down because, as usual, all of these links will be placed on the podcast. She's a member of a professional advisory board for autism. She is in a network supervisor and clinical position with the University of Pittsburgh. She has quite a list here. I'm not going to be able to get through them all. The bio will be posted. She's a workshop presenter for the Summit in Education. She was asked by Egypt to go and do a workshop, so she traveled there to do a workshop. That sounds so exciting. If we have time, I'd like to hear a little bit about that. Again, her bio will be posted so you can read more about it. Welcome again, Janice, and thank you so much for giving so much time and you're probably one of the most enthusiastic people I've had on the podcast. You were just so, you energized me, motivated me. I really appreciate your enthusiasm. Why don't you start talking a little bit about your growing up, your background, and how you became so devoted to autism and the different diagnoses on the spectrum.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Judy. Really, I'm just excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me. So I didn't really know that I grew up in an autistic family until my brother was diagnosed with autism at the age of 50. He grew up with a learning disability label before then. Then that's when I almost felt like I'd woken up and told I was adopted, because I had to revisit my entire childhood. And I realized that my mom was clearly on the spectrum. She was never officially diagnosed because, back then, if you weren't severe, you didn't get a diagnosis. And my dad did not have autism, but he had severe social anxiety. They didn't date. They were set up by their two families and then left pretty much to their own devices. So I grew up in a very interesting childhood. And, they had... first there were so many wonderful things that they gave me. My mom actually taught me to be very compassionate towards others, but then there were also things that they had, difficulties with. So, I grew up, I really feel that I grew up in an autistic culture and an autistic household, and I do not have autism, but I do have a learning disability. And I had to learn how to navigate what adults with autism call the neurotypical world, neuro meaning neurology and typical meaning typically developing, not autistic, just like the adults with Asperger's will tell you they did, trying to learn how to enter groups, how to fit in. So I always fit in just enough. We moved around a lot, and I had one friend, so I was able to blend to fit in enough.
You said you had a learning disability.
Yes.
What can you talk a little bit about that and how it may have helped you in your family or hindered you?
Well, I know what helped is that I actually have severe visual spatial deficits. I can't really use visual imagery for learning. I really think in words. There's a disorder called nonverbal learning disorder, and typically there's also a social component with it. It's been considered a milder form of Asperger's, but I don't have the social component because I was able to learn to imitate and do like others. So I definitely am not autistic. But I know that the struggles I've had with learning math of any kind, that has given me insight also to people with learning disabilities. In college, I spent 20 hours a week in the math lab. See, that's my math. 20 hours a week in the math lab, Monday through Friday, to get my bachelor's degree because I needed college algebra. I needed a semester of statistics to get my undergrad degree.
Right.
So yeah, I know that I understand trying your best, but not being able to get it.
Did your parents understand your challenge, or was this something that you kind of came to the realization on your own and sought out support?
To be well, as far as my learning disability, growing up, girls it was okay if girls were not good in math, and my verbal skills are off the charts. Like which is what nonverbal learning disorder looks like. You have a cognitive profile of unbelievably well-developed language ability, And yet anything visually spatially, like I was always actually getting in trouble a lot with my dad because I was always losing things. I can't monitor where anything is. So I was losing things. I would trip over things. I was always spraining my ankle. it was not good.
You said when we talked earlier that you did not live in a family that was curious and asked why questions.
Oh, yes.
Remember that? Can you talk about that a little bit? It's interesting.
Absolutely. So in my, in the autistic culture, there's never a why should we try to do something different, or why are we not able to do maybe what my next door neighbor is able to do. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of dread, really, of trying to keep the outside world out, because you have two emotions: either all is well with the universe, or it's the end of the world. And how often exactly is it the all is well with the universe can only happen in brief spurts. So that was really how they grew up, and that was how I viewed the world. To me, the world was a scary place, and the safe world was just the four of us, and that's really how I grew up. So no one ever asked. I, in my head, was confused a lot because I saw what they were not able to do. I was able to compare the outside world with my family. Just as a child, you're not able to analyze it or make sense of it because your family's your family. Yeah.
You have a wonderful article that we are going to post the link to. And it says, the title of it is "No Child Wakes Up Determined to Have a Bad Day." And you talk about, you just talked about the dichotomy of a great day or a horrible day. And what prompted this article, and what that's the message that you're, giving
so,
here?
I was able to, like I said, learn, because with anything with language, which is most of our academics, I did very well. My brother had severe speech delays and language delays, and he could be very volatile, autistic, what we call autistic meltdowns, trying to deal with his anger of not learning, who's a non-reader till middle school. So I watched someone really wanting to fit in, trying to do its best, but never able to, anywhere come close, because there were not a lot of supports when my brother and I grew up. We're the baby boomer generation. And it really wasn't until middle school that, he actually, we were lucky. Special ed on its own, we moved around a lot. So he was able to get placed in a special ed room before the law was passed. But there really weren't a lot of people outside, the special ed room that could even try to help my brother. My dad would try to find mainly reading specialists. But so I knew that. And to me, when I watch people with autism, I never see someone trying to be rude or inappropriate or trying to act out. I see someone who's very stressed, not understanding the rules of the game, because the neurotypical rules are very different from the autistic rules.
And I think, from my experience working with kids on the spectrum, the anxiety level of all of a sudden realizing that they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say.
Right.
They're afraid that anything they say or do will get you angry.
Yes.
That I feel that that's kind of the boiling point where there is an explosion. Would you agree with me? Is that what you see?
Yes. In fact, from the perspective of an autistic person, they give an answer. They're asked a question. They're given they answer to the best of their ability. The adult, like in school or maybe a specialist working with them, doesn't accept the answer. They might say, "Now, Billy, come on, you know the answer to this," which tells them they got it wrong.
Right.
But they don't have any other answers to give. So they start thinking, well, you asked me a question and I gave you an answer, and you're telling me I'm not smart enough to give you an answer. They then start to become stressed. And because they don't have the language to really interpret and understand maybe I should be feeling annoyed, every time they are feeling this discomfort, which, is a lot of the day, it goes to enraged pretty quickly. And in their mind, I was feeling fine until you came along and asked me this question that you're not expecting the answer to.
So it's all your fault.
Exactly. And unless the adult lets them know that validates, you're right, because I did not accept the answer you gave me, and therefore I'm not going to help you with maybe to begin with letting you know here's the kind of answer I'm looking for to help you feel successful and that we're in this together. Instead, it's going to be you didn't give me the answer I wanted, and the autistic person saying, you're telling me I don't know how to do this, and and I know how to do this. And it escalates quickly, very quickly.
That's a good suggestion for educators working in classrooms, even with children who are mainstreamed, because while teachers may have a preconceived idea of the completeness of a answer to a question they're posing, working with a child on the spectrum may require them to have a little more flexibility in that answer, or maybe go to another person, use the foundation of information that the child with the diagnosis has given, and use that as a foundation to go to the next person, validating that, and then yes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You absolutely get it. To validate the emotion they're having. Instead of you're wrong, I'm going to validate I caused you stress, and I would be upset too if I were you. And then go on to helping with, here's what I was hoping. In fact, I give a classic example. I got a phone call. There was an 11-year-old with Asperger's in the classroom, and the teacher, being very kind, wanted to help this child out. So, of course, they had him sitting in the front, which was good. And so she had a question. She passed out a picture to everyone, or a drawing, illustration, not sure what it was. And she called on him first, which is the worst thing you can do to someone with autism, because now, number one, they're not given a chance to watch someone else answer so that they know what to do. And the question was, tell me one thing you like about the picture. And he gave an autistic response, which is, I didn't know I was supposed to lie. I thought you wanted me to give you a real answer. And he said, I don't like anything about this picture. And it went downhill from there, where I don't know the entire dialogue, but we can all guess. He ended up at the principal's office. And Mom got called.
I call that with my kids the difference between the thought bubble and the speech bubble.
Yes.
And we sometimes draw pictures. This is what you're thinking, and you can write that down. But the speech bubble might come out a little differently.
And they have no idea that rule exists.
Right.
They have no idea that we are talking to ourselves because they can't see it and they can't hear it. And that we do have all those thoughts. That's the ugliest picture I ever saw. But out loud, I say, oh, Miss Smith, I love this part of the picture.
Right. There's got to be something there that you like.
Find anything.
Find what you like, the colors.
The color, anything, yeah.
Say something nice. Well, you have given a whole list of challenges that children with the diagnosis of autism face every day, and certainly you've addressed some of them. But can you think of some others, this anticipatory anxiety that you've spoken about?
Oh, yes. This is
one thing that intrigues me.
The research really, and primarily the brain imaging research, the neuroscience, cognitive science research is really what drives my intervention. And there's newer research out there, and it's really the research looking at what's underlying all of it, what's going on in the brain. So there's newer research out there, and they've called it anticipatory anxiety. And what that is that typical language learners like us, we are we have been actively making predictions every waking second of our life. We do it so efficiently, we don't even know we're doing it. Like, for example, this podcast. I've done one online, talk show. So I had in my mind an idea of what this would look and sound like. So I've been doing a lot of self-talk, going, it's okay, Janice, you've spoken before, you know what to do. And that is what has allowed me to show up today. If you aren't able to do that, what happens is you go to, it's the end of the world pretty quickly, because you have no idea what's going to happen. You're not retrieving any experience, not just that you've had, but that you've heard maybe 2 doors down, and you've heard 2 words, and you've stored that into your memory. And we're comparing and contrasting every second in front of us. That's what allows us to learn academically, to become employed, to develop interpersonal relationships. In fact, there's, the newer research, they did a study with typical 10-month-old babies. And I don't have this, I haven't actually read the study, just the kind of the summary of it or the abstract. And so they showed babies, very short little videos, one with an adult, very, with a lot of effort trying to open a jar, I believe it was. And the babies watched the adult do that. And then the next video would show an adult really easily, with no struggle, just calmly, simply, very quickly opening the jar. And what they saw in the brain, they saw much higher brain activation when the babies were watching the adults put a lot of effort into something.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And that shows the babies were already able to infer the effort or an action intent by somebody else. And a study that's a few years older than that showed that by the end of our 2nd year of life, when mom has us on her hip and she's talking to someone who's not us, or not directed to us, we're already inferring what the meaning and content of that conversation is. So we have been practicing making predictions. What are they talking about? And what does that mean to me? How, to the best of my 2-year-old ability, I'm going to interpret that, so that by the time I'm 3, I'm an entirely, complete conversationalist, and I can go to preschool or I can hang out with friends without freaking out, because I am actively making predictions anytime I've ever encountered anyone my own age. And when you're not doing that, whenever you walk into a room, even if it's the same classroom for 6 months, every morning when you walk in there, your brain has not been actively saying, okay, what's my day going to look like? What's the classroom going to look like? What's probably going to be the first thing the teacher wants us to do? So when you walk in, when someone says, Billy, why are you just standing there? You know what to do. Billy gets even more dysregulated because Billy has no idea what to do in that moment.
So one of the things you've told me is that autistic kids get in trouble every day because they can't do this self-talk that you're talking about and making connections between this is what I did yesterday in the classroom, this is what she'll probably ask me to do today. That every situation, even though it's repeated, every situation to autistic children is new and scary and anxiety producing. Am I right with that? No matter how mundane the experience.
Right. Because they are never saying what's probably going to happen next. Yes, with self-talk, whenever they're asked, Billy, what do we do next? That is the most frightening question to them, because the brain is not pulling up information to say, well, what did I do yesterday? And if you think about it, no 2 mornings in our lives have ever been exactly the same. So typical learners, we have this really big global rule for everything, as in school. What do classrooms typically look like? It doesn't matter if the seating arrangement's different, that it's a new teacher, because I know from any experience I've ever had, seen, or watched, what is probably going to happen in this classroom. And that's what allows us, even though we're nervous the first day of school, to calmly, we look calm on the outside to come in, sit down, wait for the teacher to say something. When you're not making that rule of, here's the big rule, classrooms, each part of your day is different from that part of the day, from the day before even, or the hour before. So the reason why each morning feels the same to us, because we have a big global rule. Anytime I've lived in a house, anytime I've slept in a bed, what is my morning probably going to look like? When you're not doing that, when mom wakes you up, you really have no idea what the next half hour is going to look like, what the next hour is going to look like. That is why things like that we get excited about, like birthdays and Halloween and vacations, can be very frightening to people on the spectrum, because they are not pulling up any experience they've ever had at Christmas, any experience they've ever had with birthdays, to go, oh, this is actually going to be fun. I don't know what's going to happen exactly, but it doesn't matter. I know I've enjoyed my birthday, so I don't care what the cake looks like. I don't care where we have the birthday. I don't even care if we just stay home. I know I'm going to have fun. And that's what's not happening efficiently with people with autism.
You talk about this self-talk and what could happen, but then you refer to the deep hole thinkers who are having a very different conversation with themselves. Is that what you mean by the deep hole thinkers?
You mean like when I was talking about going into the black hole?
Oh, the black hole, right. Sure.
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
So exactly. So they are one thought at a time thinkers, because they're just trying to have the thought of what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? So they don't have plan B. If I don't know what to do, I should ask for help. So what happens is the adult looks at them and says, Billy, what are you supposed to be doing right now? That implies you don't like me at this moment. And they do know that. They know, oh, I got in trouble again. I did it wrong again. When you don't like me, that means you hate me, because all they have is happy, sad, mad. Right. Mad is rage, and sad is, depressed. So you are mad at me. If you are mad at me, you will never like me again.
Yeah.
That's actually their whole thinking of what's going on and why they look and sound and act the way they do. When the teacher goes, Billy, this is the last time I'm going to tell you, what should you be doing right now? Then either they'll end up in the principal's office, or because in their mind, it is the end of the world. Life is over as they know it. In that moment of distress. Yes. And research is showing also that they are stressed far before we notice it. They look calm on the outside. They look just like the typical kids do, but they have probably been escalating in stress for about 10 or 15 minutes before it is noticed by someone who is not autistic. And so it looks to us that they go into rage very quickly, when actually they've been probably emotionally stressed for about 15, 20 minutes before we even start to notice.
We have talked about anxiety quite a bit, and I gather from the way you keep coming back to it that this is probably the priority issue that you feel needs to be recognized and addressed with kids who are diagnosed with autism. So diffusing anxiety, I would assume, is one of the important goals. Let's talk a little bit about your book, Reasoning and Problem Solving in Children with ASD. And because I gather from reading the summary of your book that that anxiety and diffusing anxiety is one of the focuses that you address in the book. Can you tell us a little bit about the highlights, what the outline is, maybe what the different chapters talk about, and then go into the name of your program, Thinking in Speech, and talk a little bit about how you address these?
Yes. So the book, the first part of the book, I do go over some of the research, because if we don't understand why someone is acting the way they are, it's really going to be very difficult to help them. So the first part of the book, I talk about autism being a language and executive functioning disorder, underlying everything. And so executive functioning, I could never find a definition that I could really, well, one, I have a hard time visualizing, but also I can really try to understand. It says, executive functioning is goal planning and knowing how long you should be doing something. And very simplistically, executive functioning is, I go back to pulling up any experience you've ever had or heard or watched or read, and holding on to that and comparing that with what's in front of you in the moment, and then coming up with a logical conclusion for that moment. And so I talk about the research underlying it, and I talk about the difference between implicit learning and explicit learning. Okay. And explicit learning, typically autism interventions tend to approach things from the explicit learning, because explicit learning is pretty intact in people with autism. Explicit learning is how we learn to tie our shoes, how we learn to get dressed, how we learn to brush our teeth. Someone showed us, and then we imitated, and we could see it, we could practice it. Implicit learning is what we did when the first time ever, we maybe watched somebody when we were 2, or probably more like 3, and we watched somebody get in trouble. And we knew from then on, boy, I'm not going to do what that person did. We stored that into our world knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean let's say someone tried to get a cookie out of the cookie jar. I probably am still going to try to get a cookie out of the cookie jar, but I'm going to try a plan B. I realize plan A doesn't work. Like, maybe don't try to get the cookie in front of mom. That's not going to work. That's implicit learning, in that nobody ever sat us down to teach us. It would be wonderful if we learned that way. I tell people then a preschool teacher or a mom or a parent would just have to say, here's the list. Here's all the ways to not get a timeout, to never get grounded. And so I read the list, I'm explicitly learning. I'm going to read the list, don't do these 10 things, great. And I'm never going to get in trouble for the rest of my life. But we don't learn that way. We learn by doing. We learn by experimenting. We're hardwired that way. That's why we get in trouble, because we're learning how to do things in a way that we don't get us in trouble. And that we shape our quote, behavior that way. So, that's what's not very efficient in people with autism, and why they get in trouble all the time. They don't understand that they're supposed to give you answers because they haven't learned implicitly. Don't really give the answer they're asking. Like, what do you like about my hair? Or what do you like about my outfit? Mm-hmm. I say, if you ask an open-ended question to an autistic person, you have to be willing to accept the answer. Because when we don't, we set them up for failure, as in, no, there's a special kind of answer you give me. You always say, I love your hair. I love your outfit. That's implicit learning. No one sat us down to teach us that. We learned one time, and that's what little kids do. They'll go, oh, that's ugly. And the mom will say, Billy, we never say that out loud. And we learn to think it, but not say it out loud.
That's your thought bubble.
And that goes into the next part, which is about what is inner speech, and going into the interventions. So when we're preschoolers, and you really see it when preschoolers are playing, like role playing, and even more so when they're role playing by themselves, like a little girl wanting to pretend to be mommy, and she'll say, so what should we do next? I know what. We're going to go grocery shopping, and then I'm going to have to come home and feed the baby. That's what's called private speech. They're having a dialogue out loud with themselves. It's having a dialogue with self and this entity other. because we do use you pronouns and we pronouns as if we are a plural. That then transitions into what's called inner speech by the time we're in grade school. And inner speech is doing the same thing, but now we're doing it for the most part silently. We're having dialogues with ourselves every waking second. And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're saying that kids with autism don't learn how to see this process develop, and by the time they're older, they haven't learned how to do the inner speech?
So inner speech, private speech transitions naturally in typical language developers without ever being taught. It's just slowly, silently internalized.
Right.
We still revert back to private speech as adults. Like usually it's when we're in the bathroom and we're alone, and I'll blurt out, "I can't believe I did that." Intense emotions will bring out. Or if somebody goes, "Were you talking to me?" "No, I was just talking out loud."
Now, are you saying inner speech is the same thing as private speech?
No, well, it's same mechanism. So private speech is the precursor to inner speech. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so research shows people with autism have pretty intact private speech. And that's what they get in trouble for a lot, because their inner speech is not well developed. And that's how we problem solve. We problem solve by silently thinking to ourselves all the time. So someone with autism out loud will say, "You're making me really angry and you need to go away and I don't like you." And they get in trouble for that kind of language to another person, usually an adult. Right. But if you think about it, when as kids, we did that kind of, when we were mad. I know me, when I was mad at my parents, or if I felt a teacher or another grown-up had not been fair to me, I did a lot of silent inner speech about them. They're not very nice, and I don't like them right now, and I wish I had a different mommy and daddy, because this mommy and daddy is just being very mean right now. But I knew not to do it out loud. I was able to not do it out loud. So the intervention that I do is taking that private speech and helping transition that as to the best of the person's ability to inner speech, where they start to silently have dialogue, silently start to problem solve.
You could tell a couple of really good stories. One is the chocolate chip cookie story, and your brother and his favorite food. Do you want to just kind of share those with us a little bit? I think they might be linked to what we're talking about.
Yes. So, growing up with autistics, I understand the autistic rules. And so real quickly, I'd like to kind of, so my brother loves food that is free. That's the kind of food he loves. In fact, if for his birthday one year, because it would get frustrating because before I really understood that I grew up in an autistic family, and I would get very frustrated because I would want my brother to tell me what kind of food, what restaurant would you like to eat at? And so one time he told me, "Well, I like any food that's under $5.
I love
and
that.
Being a typical language learner, I then said, "Would that be Chinese?" Or, so, and of course he didn't get that we're implicit learners. We get that was humor because we know. And it doesn't matter if I don't need, because, sometimes I just don't have a preference for my birthday, because we always take each other out for our birthdays. And I won't say anything under $5. I might say, "I don't have a preference. Is there a place you'd like to go?"
Right.
And so, so my brother's global understanding of the word free is anytime he doesn't have to pay for it. And so what happens is someone can look like they're not caring or kind of selfish, because our global rule of free is anytime anyone didn't have to pay for it. So we had to help him with, when we'd go to someone's house, if it was a buffet, the guest always says, "Help yourself." When you're not an implicit learner and you see all this, quote, free food, you're not. So what's not happening is that pulling up of world knowledge, even though I have many different rules of what the word free means. Free food at someone else's house.
Right.
Free food at at maybe a charity auction, which is really go back, come back 3 times and help yourself, and free at an all-you-can-eat buffet at a restaurant.
Right.
These have like variations in rules. And so if all you have is one rule, free means I didn't have to pay for it. And my brother is one of the kindest, most generous people I know. If I asked him to empty his bank account for me, he would, if I said I needed the money.
Right.
So, and he doesn't have to watch his pennies. So it's not like, I better only eat things under $5 because I don't have the money to buy something that's $6. So,
but it gives him pleasure not to have to go into his wallet.
In fact, my dad and I know that he was serious, but people will chuckle. My brother has said, food tastes better when it's free, and he means it.
That is so funny. You talk about teaching the reasoning and problem-solving skills explicitly with children with autism. And there's a process that you use to teach them this. I know one of them is to recognize there is a problem, and then you kind of go on from there. So maybe you could kind of help us develop that a little bit, what your process is.
Oh, yes. So when we feel any kind of emotion, especially a more intense one, we feel, with me, it's always a tightening in my stomach. I feel this uncomfortable tightness in my stomach. My brain then activates to go, not, I want to keep the world out because I'm not feeling comfortable, but to start pulling out my knowledge of, so what's in front of me? Why am I feeling this feeling? For me, math is a terror. So if I say, a calculus test is coming up, I label that extreme anxiety, extreme stress, and I'm going to react accordingly, which means not hide in the closet. I am going to study a lot to get ready for it. So now, in a different situation, I have that tightening in my gut, and I go, I feel uncomfortable. What's happening? And I see a cake with candles on it. I'm going to call that same discomfort excited, because I've pulled up my world knowledge about birthdays, and it is my birthday, and so I'm very happy, because excited is really a happy nervous, but it is still nervousness. Right. There's a nervous component in excited. So that is why people with autism, kids with autism, can act very distressed at their birthdays, at Halloween. So what I do is I'm really going to act as their inner voice. They also have very decreased self-awareness, self-insight of who they are as a human being, because you have to be an intact implicit learner for that. We do all that dialoguing, have done. Who am I as a human being? We picked what course of education we were going to take for career, because we understood ourselves as our strengths and our flaws. So number one, I let them know, because I'm the stressor. I'm going to impose stress. And so I let them know that I'm going to cause you stress on purpose, and I do apologize for that, because learning is hard, and this is what hard feels like. This is what learning feels like. And your body and I describe what their body is doing. Because number one, you have to have self-insight of what my body does to tell me it's stressed. You told me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to get this in. You said that your experience with learning is agitation, aggravation, and sobbing. Yes. And so, I love that. Agitation, aggravation, and sobbing. And so, yes, that is what, when you don't understand, number one, what those words mean. So I had a lot of agitation, stress, and sobbing when I had to take statistics, because my brain was not able to visualize any of it. And so if all they have is happy, sad, mad, which typically negative vocabulary tends not to get stressed, and that's how we cope. We build coping skills from understanding the difference between annoyed, you took my pencil, but I can get another one, but it is annoying, to enraged. Maybe, my family, you've tried to hurt my family, and you're allowed to be enraged over someone hurting your family, but not if someone takes your pencil. But if all you have is mad, you're always going to react as if you're enraged. because you don't know the difference. Your brain isn't interpreting the feeling for you. And so it's really just pointing out, you over time, you explain to them what their body does to them when they're stressed. So and I'll say, interesting, your body is showing me, and I separate the brain from them. Your brain is showing me stress. This is what we call stress. Did you feel how your face got really tight, and I'll imitate it, or maybe they moved back away from me? And in the beginning, a lot of times they have no idea. They didn't recognize it. And so you help them over time with that. So they learn, this is what stuck feels like. This is what a problem feels like. And then they learn, what do you do about it? You ask for help. And over time, then they start to independently do that.
I want to go back and kind of label these. You gave us some wonderful information, but I kind of want to break it up a little bit for our listeners.
Sure.
You talked about recognize that there is a problem.
Yes.
Then you talked about applying knowledge from previous times and comparing situations.
Yes.
And differentiating the different kinds of stress that's associated with those situations that we're kind of calling up in our memory banks. Would you say that those are the 3 or 4 main approaches to working with a child and explicitly teaching them?
Yes, because in fact, you stated it perfectly. You're explicitly teaching implicit thinking, and that's how you do it. Because they really don't know that we are all, I call it self-talk for them because that's what the label we all know.
Right.
They don't know we're all doing that. If you ask an autistic person, have you ever seen anyone ask for help? Or do you think people ask for help? They'll tell you no. Because no one ever points out, oh, look, Sally 2 doors down is asking for help right now. We implicitly know that every human being on the planet gets stressed, and every human being on the planet is asking for help. When you actually explain that to them, they look shocked. They're surprised. They had no idea. They really believe they are the only ones not getting it right.
Getting it. Oh, gosh. It's really sad. In some respects, because we're not getting it either. And if they're not getting it, that doesn't make for a good combination.
And so to be ready for learning, you have to first be, in a regulated state, in a nice, I'm nervous, math is hard for me, but this teacher has helped me before, and I know this teacher will help me again. And learning is not going to happen if one is in a distressed state. I mean, we know this from psychology. And so the goal needs to be first getting them out of this distressed state and knowing that you are on their side and you're part of the team that's going to help them with this. Then they're ready for learning. And I find that that's typically what seems to get left out. People want to know, what do I teach? How do I teach this? But before that is ever going to happen, they have to know they are a competent learner. And that's part of dealing with stress too.
I have this labeled in my notes, literacy. I'm not sure how you would define it, but it seems to kind of follow along with what you're talking about, familiar situations, not familiar situations, but you're also talking about books, reading books.
Yes.
Do you use the books for explicit teaching? Do you use the books?
Yes.
Okay, so give me an example of what you would do with that. You said who picks out the book, and what about corrections when you're reading? Is this a fun time, or do you use this as a reading lesson?
So I really believe this is just how I approach it, because I know that when they're with me, I'm working on all the parts of the brain that are struggling. And I let them know that this is not what fun feels like. When I was in school learning statistics, I had 0 fun. There was not a half a second of fun. And so I tell them, and probably because I grew up with that, I know that this is not fun. And I call it reading for learning, which is very different than reading for fun.
Right.
And reading for learning is you slow it down, You are actively thinking about the words. And reading, literacy is part and parcel of the intervention that I do, probably because I watched my brother struggle so many years. And to get reading comprehension, in a nutshell, you let them know they have all the answers. Because in language arts, there's always going to be an emotional question asking an emotional response. Why was Billy upset? Why did Billy act the way he did? And they approach it from, well, how am I supposed to know this character in this book? I didn't write the book. I have no idea what's going on in the book, because they're not pulling up their world knowledge to compare. So you help them with, how would you feel if someone took your bike away from you? They will then go, well, I'd be really upset. Yes, that's the answer. And you help them. This is executive functioning, because they're going to have to hold on to the thought about themselves. First, they had to think about themselves, pull it up, give an answer, and hold on to it, not lose the thought. Go back to the book, reread, and then still have this original thought and go, Billy or George, whoever I've named the character, would be mad that someone took his bike. And you then praise, yes, you have all the book answers. The answer for you is the right answer. And you're also working on executive functioning by getting that brain activating, by having them retrieve their world knowledge, compare and contrast. So you're also working on all the language goals at the same time, but you get more bang for your buck by doing it with literacy, to incorporate that as well.
So the question of how would you feel if,
yes,
phrasing it is very different than looking at a child and saying, how do you feel? Which is out of context.
Right, because if you say, how do you feel to an autistic child who isn't being helped with, well, I think I'm feeling a little annoyed right now and I'm feeling uncomfortable. And I teach them those words. I teach them uncomfortable. I teach them nervous. I teach them anxious. So that if I were to ask someone who's worked with me for a while, in fact, I will ask them, I'll say, when I notice dysregulation, I'll say, how are you feeling right now? Because you're showing me, but I'm going to help them with the answer. Your brain is showing me uncomfortable and nervous right now. How are you feeling? And they'll let me know, yeah, I am feeling nervous. And and then I validate that.
Do you give them a word bank? Literally give them a word bank?
Yes, I actually have a list, and you can pull them up from the internet or from any workbook, with a list of vocabulary. And I let them know that happy, sad, mad are 3-year-old words, because we've been using those since we were 3. And they're usually in categories. They'll have, happy with maybe a smiley face, and then all the vocabulary words in that group. I'll say, find the group you're in, like happy, sad, mad, whatever it is. And then we work on vocabulary. We work on character traits, work on mental state vocabulary, such as I wish. Because you can't see somebody thinking, I wish I could do that. I wish this wasn't hard for me. And you have to actually give them conceptual understanding of what those words mean, as in, I'm going to tell you a time when I've been deceitful, because every human being has been deceitful. That's why we have the word. And then you're going to let me know a time when you've been deceitful, because you're a human being. That's how I know you've been deceitful. And that's the other thing. Neurotypicals, these rules, they have arbitrary rules that I had to learn, because we all lie, but we all pretend we don't. We're not allowed to admit, I've been deceitful, I've been manipulative. The difference is we've all done it sometimes. We don't do it consistently. That's the difference between us and a sociopath.
And also getting back to that picture, what do you like about the picture? Sometimes we're deceitful to spare someone else bad feelings.
Exactly.
And rather than trying to get ourselves out of, something that we've done so we won't get in trouble. So there's different. And are they able to pick up on those nuances? They're not on their own. They're helped when you approach everything, and I say, so there's this rule, and I don't know who made up this rule. You let them know you're a part of this, because we were born being forced to have to adapt to these rules that we didn't choose, we didn't vote on them. We all have to pretend that we like a teacher when we don't.
who's been maybe really stern and mean and maybe called us out in class one time, and I do hold a grudge. I will remember when I was 8, I remembered a teacher, if they called me out, and I, ever after, I had a little grudge, but I never expressed it. I never showed it. They never knew about it. And when you're autistic, you have because that's all language. You have to have highly developed abstract language to be able to be an implicit thinker, an implicit learner. And when they're helped with that, they can start to actually build their coping skills and start to be someone that adults will go, oh, Billy, I don't understand it, but all of a sudden it's just clicking. Like Billy just seems to know what to do. And I just nod and smile because, letting the adult, because, none of us want to feel like we're hurting a child, emotionally,
right,
or that we don't know what to do. And so I want to help that adult also feel that this is, number one, I like Billy, and Billy is someone who likes me. He's showing me now that he likes me. And you just tell them that there are rules. There's a rule. I don't know who made up this rule, but we're never allowed to tell someone, I don't like you, even if we don't. And their eyes are like, well, why, if they're making me mad, and I go, I know, I understand it. It doesn't matter if we find them annoying sometimes. We have to pretend they're never annoying. And I even will then throw at them, isn't that weird?
Isn't right?
And they always go, yes. Yes, that is a weird rule.
And if you ask a child on the spectrum a question, or you're trying to explain something to them and they are not getting it, yes, I gather one of the worst things you can say is, pay better attention.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, because they've been paying attention to the best of their ability, no matter what it looks like. I have buttons too that get pushed. If someone is, looking under the table and not really attending to what I'm asking of them, it can feel like they're intentionally trying to not do what I'm asking, when to the best of their ability in that moment. That just means when I see someone looking under the table instead of the book, they are in a moment of stress, and I know I have caused that stress. Anytime they are working on language, we are the stressor, and that's one thing that I always approach it from their perspective. I'm causing you stress, and I know I'm causing you stress. Because learning is stressful and hard is stressful. But here's the deal. I tell them that, because you have to give them a choice, because no one can force anyone to learn. I'll say, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to stay stuck. And number one, they don't know how they come across. And when I let them know, people, it's not fair and it's not right, but people who don't understand brain glitches, is what I call it, they think you don't like them.
Say that again. What do you call it?
Brain glitches.
Brain glitches.
We all have them. And I say, people are feeling that you don't like them and that you're not a nice person. They are horrified to hear that. It doesn't matter if they've screamed and yelled at you, if they've thrown something at you. They have no idea what they look like, because for us to know how we look to others, we have to be implicit thinkers.
One of the big things I hear, I will hear teachers say, don't disrespect me. I'm trying to explain something to you. I need you to look at me. Right. Why are you looking around the room? Why are you paying attention to somebody sharpening a pencil? I need you to look at me. Yeah. And I think that lack of understanding also, it can be very hurtful and can trigger. Sometimes we feel a student is being willfully disrespectful, and we don't understand how that's connected to the diagnosis.
And they have no idea that they're not doing optimal getting ready for learning. Whatever they are doing, and probably at that, and also when we're stressed, the one thing we don't do is make eye contact with whoever is causing us stress. So if you're someone for making eye contact is already uncomfortable, the second a teacher says you're being disrespectful, they don't really know what that word means. They know it's never good. And they interpret you're being disrespectful as, I got it wrong again.
And you don't like me.
You don't like me, you hate me, therefore you will never like me again.
Right,
and
right.
they end up in the principal's office usually.
Right.
So,
now,
yeah.
You have an article that you've written. We're getting toward the end, and there's a couple of things I want to push through. And I believe it's called Do's and Don'ts. Is that an article?
Yeah.
And I want to, can you kind of give us an overview of that? Because I want to put the link on the website so that people can read it in its entirety. But what is the focus of that article?
So really, really briefly, it's my philosophy of that, that a child is always trying their best, regardless of how they come across. Basically, it's saying, that always treat a child as if they were trying to show you they like, and that they do know what to do, even if their outward behavior doesn't feel like that to you. And so basically, that's the overview. It's just, to me, I grew up and I didn't watch a family trying to look odd, trying to not fit in, and a brother who was intentionally trying to hurt people. I saw people in very distressed modes. And so my do's and don'ts are really to remember that this is a child who's not getting it. He or she doesn't understand what learning looks like, what optimal learning feels like, and how to show you, what do I need to do to show you that I'm someone who wants your approval? And they all want our approval. The way they show it will tell you if they need help. If they're actually begging us for help, the more distressed they look. Because they're really saying, I have no idea what else to do in this moment.
Wow, that's interesting. That's a very powerful statement. The more agitated they are, the more they're asking for help in their own way. You have a quote that I saw that you shared by George Carlin. And you say, we all smile in the same language. And yes. I think that might be a great way to end the podcast, because in the same vein, when we are distressed, behavior is a form of communication also. And these children with their accelerated aggravation, agitation, anxiety are also communicating with us. Maybe they can't do it with words, but they are also communicating with us as well.
Yes, yes.
Janice, thank you so much for being with us today. There were other things I wanted to get to, but I didn't want to stop all the great information that you were sharing. Janice is an author, but she's also a speaker. I know that she would be happy to connect with you if you wanted her to come and speak to a group. We're going to have all her links on the podcast, so please check out the articles that she's written. Please go to the book, and we'll have some personal links for her so that you can communicate with her as well. Thank you again, Janice, and again for all of your enthusiasm and your time in giving to all of us to share so much information.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.